Usually when a big once-in-a-generation game comes out, it's served alongside a healthy dose of controversy. The latest subject being the one and only Starfield. Now, I'm recording this the day after the review embargo lifted. Currently, it's sitting at an 87 on Metacritic for the Xbox version and an 88 for the PC version. And so when the reviews dropped, it was a lot of 10s, a lot of 9s and 9.5s, and then a few 7s mixed in there too. Most notably from bigger publications like IGN, GameSpot, and PC Gamer. And so to see all the reviews come out the other day was interesting, because I do think it points out a larger problem with reviews as a whole, especially review scores. Because it is wild to see the 87 on Metacritic just be totally differently interpreted by two groups of people. There's one group who says that 87 is a fantastic score, it's a must-play title, and there's another group saying that an 87 is basically just unplayable trash. And it's the same score. How are you interpreting it so differently? I think an 87 is a quite good score, personally. It is a little bit lower than I was anticipating. I was thinking it would sit at around a 91 or a 92. But there were a lot of people who were definitely thinking that this game was going to be in that Baldur's Gate 3 and Tears of the Kingdom territory. So I do think that the wildly different interpretations of that 87 Metacritic score do show a perfect example of why review scores do not matter. Because especially for a giant game like Starfield, there's so many different systems, so much content to get through. To summarize all of that in just a single number score, I feel like is basically impossible. And it's certainly not doing the game any favors one way or another. And the videos I've made on this channel, I wouldn't call any of them reviews, more just analysis on a particular part of a game, because if I was to make a review of a game, I would have to get so deep into it. I need to explore every nook and cranny to give a comprehensive overview of what playing the game is like. And when reviewers are writing a review running up against a deadline, you know they're not thinking as critically as they probably should be. And there are people who just hinge so much of their identity on certain games that they haven't even played, which makes absolutely zero sense. Another problem is that review scores often draw comparisons to other games that reviewer has reviewed, because every time a review comes out with a score lower than the mob likes, then they'll go back through that reviewer's past reviews and see what they gave other games. Like, I saw a lot of comments how Dan Stapleton, the review editor at IGN, gave Starfield a 7, but gave Watch Dogs Legion an 8, which I don't think comparisons like that are exactly fair, because games can come from entirely different development teams with entirely different ambitions and just be totally separate genres of games. Like, I could see leaning towards giving an indie game a higher score, especially if it's made by a small team, versus a game from a big AAA developer, because a small indie team just has so far fewer resources than the AAA team. And to me, something that is created out of struggle and with less resources is a lot more impressive than a very middling AAA experience. And also, when you just go by reviews from one reviewer, you gotta realize people have different preferences in the kind of games they like. Like, if I was to do a review of, let's say, League of Legends, which I've never played, but I can just tell that is not a game I would enjoy, I probably wouldn't give it a very good score, but that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of people who love it and probably would give it a 10 out of 10. It all comes down to personal preferences, which is why hinging everything on just one reviewer doesn't make a lot of sense. Which is why I think the best way of getting an idea of whether you like a game or not is, instead of pre-ordering, waiting until the game comes out, and then reading discussions from people who might not necessarily be full-time game reviewers, but just ordinary people who play games. I feel like your experience is probably going to line up more closely with that. Because when you read an online discussion of a game on Reddit or Twitter or something, the people who are discussing a game, they have no reason to lie. Unless they own stock in the company, they're probably going to be pretty honest about their experience with the game. And a lot of times, when you have thousands or even millions of people playing a game versus a couple dozen reviewers, they're going to be able to pinpoint the flaws and the pros of a game a lot better just by the sheer number of people playing it. You'll be able to get a wider range of opinions on it. which is why pre-ordering just does not make sense. I would never recommend pre-ordering a game. Unless you literally know the development team and have inside info about every aspect of the game, there's no way that they can tell you everything there is to know, and you don't want to assume that there are features or gameplay elements that aren't there. Because what I feel like happens a lot of time is people create things in their imagination of what they want a certain game to be, and then they get angry when it turns out not to be reality. It's not a new game, but that's exactly what I think happened with the Red Dead Redemption port a few weeks ago. People were expecting some full remake of the first Red Dead Redemption, maybe in the Red Dead 2 engine, and it turned out to be a pretty basic port. And despite the fact that no one was promised a remake of Red Dead Redemption, and it wasn't even leaked from any credible leakers, it was just that Red Dead Redemption was coming back in some way, people were still so angry about it and upset that I was promised a remake of Red Dead Redemption. How dare they not give it to me? When, no, it was never promised. Nothing is promised, even if it's leaked, nothing is promised unless it comes straight out of the game publisher's mouth. And even then, you're better off waiting until after a game comes out to see if it is real what the developers and the publisher were saying. Like, there's a reason that the Todd Howard Sweet Little Lies video is viral and he is memed on constantly for that. You are literally losing nothing by waiting for a game to come out instead of pre-ordering it and playing it day one. Yeah, you might play it a little later than everyone else, but more likely you'll make a more informed purchase and have a better experience with it. Especially now that games are charging extra money for early access, which is one of the trends that I really hate the most with modern gaming. I feel like Hogwarts Legacy was the big one recently that charged extra to be able to play a few days early, which is just such bullshit. Like, that's not a true early access beta period. They're not taking player feedback and changing the game based on it, especially because the early access period usually only lasts like 5 or 6 days. No, it's just charging you extra to play it a little bit earlier than everyone else, taking advantage of your love for the IP or for the developer. And this is especially abhorrent with Game Pass, where the whole idea behind it is play all Xbox games day one. You're not exactly playing it day one if you're charging people extra for early access. Like, you can't just draw arbitrary lines like that, like, oh no, this is the actual release date. Everything before that is just early access. Like, no, the game is clearly finished. It's not a closed beta that you have to apply to get into. You're just wanting to make a little bit of extra money off the hype. And it seems like for this game and for a lot of past games, there can be a pretty big disconnect between the player base and the professional reviewers, because there's a lot of 9s and 10s out there from review sites. But based on what I'm reading, it doesn't seem like that score totally lines up with what people are saying about it. And so one problem I'm sensing with a lot of review sites is it seems they have an incentive by default to give a higher score than they might normally, especially for a big publisher like Bethesda, because a review site is reliant on the game companies to get review codes ahead of release, because you gotta have the review written and published on the embargo day, or else it's probably not gonna get nearly as many clicks, which means less ad revenue on your site. And I think it just makes logical sense that a game site might give a higher review score to a game like Starfield. Every game Bethesda makes is so highly anticipated. I can see them thinking, oh man, if we give this a bad score, they might not send us a review copy in the future. I feel like this was very much the case for Cyberpunk 2077, which, if you remember, when the reviews for that came out at first, that was like a sea of 9s and 10s. And of course, the game came out and it was found to not be that at all. And I played Cyberpunk well after it came out, once the next gen update went out on PS5, and even without many bugs and glitches, I still didn't love it. It was okay. Definitely not a 9 or a 10, more like a 6 or a 7. There's also the fact that a lot of game companies will advertise on game review sites, which is a total conflict of interest, because if you give a bad review to a game, don't be surprised if they start advertising less on your site. And I'm not just speaking in hypotheticals here, that's exactly what happened to Jeff Gerstmann in 2007. He was fired from GameSpot after giving a 6 out of 10 to the game Kane and Lynch Dead Men, which was heavily advertised advertised on the site, and soon after his review came out, he was gone. And it came out later that yes, it was not a coincidence. It was the publisher pressuring GameSpot to fire him. And so that sort of calls into question the validity of any game review, which is why I definitely think that reading discussions from just regular people who play games is the best way to get an accurate reading of whether a game is good or not. Because aside from stupid console warring, which there's definitely a lot of that, they've got very little reason to lie. And I think even a lot of big Xbox fans, if they're disappointed by Starfield, they're going to make it known because they want better games. They're not going to pretend to like Starfield. And I'm not talking about the user rating on a site like Metacritic, which I don't even know why that is a thing. Every big game that comes out, it just gets review bombed there anyway. So like, they should just get rid of it. There's no reason to have an aggregate score from thousands of people. It's always going to be either zeros or tens. And it's just who review bombs the hardest that wins out. So nothing that is going on right now with Starfield is new. It's just the latest example in a long line of examples of the big problem with reviews and review scores. So basically my advice would be don't pre-order games, wait until after they come out to see the performance, see what the gameplay is like. Don't make assumptions based on things you don't have evidence for, and don't take a review score as complete gospel. All right, that is the end of the video. Thank you for watching.